So we've got a pretty great chapter here because we're getting the ending of All for One's flashback and origin story, and with that we're getting to see the greatest battle to ever take place in the My Hero Academia world, and that is the epic fight between Prime All Might and Prime All for One, which happened around 7 years, I think, before the story had started. The fight that nerfed both All Might and All for One. And I'll get to that, of course, but first we're seeing the moment when All for One straight up kills his brother Yoichi. And this apparently happened 2 months after Kudo had rescued Yoichi from being held captive by All for One. And it's pretty brutal. I don't know what quirk he's using to kill him, but he's like blowing him apart. Could be decay. I don't think it is, but that would be pretty interesting because that also still needs to be revealed that All for One is very likely to be the one that gave Shigaraki or young Tenko Shimura the decay quirk. That would be pretty hilarious if Horikoshi never reveals that. But he's doing something. I don't know, maybe an air blast or something. I don't know. But this is the moment when Yoichi died. And Kudo, looks at All for One as they're, escaping. And this is ultimately going to become the downfall of All for One. This trickle-down effect, or, as Horikoshi put it, the butterfly effect a couple chapters back. The flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil can cause a hurricane in Texas. It's just this moment where Kudo looks at All for One so menacingly and without fear that it eventually goes on to live through Bakugo. And we'll talk about that because I have some things to say. But later on, All for One is chilling in his penthouse or whatever, and he has Yoichi's hand, just like how he had the hands of Shigaraki's deceased family members. And by holding it, he's able to notice that Yoichi's quirk is gone. Not only his original quirk, but also the quirk that All for One gave him, the power stockpiler quirk. And I was wondering, how does he know that the quirk is gone from just holding the hand? And I forgot that aside from the quirk factor, having a quirk gives your body a special mechanism called the plus alpha. And these plus alphas are collectively called the quirk factor. So I suppose he's just analyzing the plus alpha in the hand and seeing that it doesn't exist anymore. And I'm just assuming that All for One's quirk allows him to have this ability too. Just the inherent ability of it. But this is denoting, of course, the origin of One for All. Because Yoichi originally had a quirk that allowed him to give the quirk. But the quirk factor was so small and insignificant that it didn't even register to All for One that it was even a quirk. So that's why All for One forcibly gave him the power stockpiler quirk, because he wanted him to stop being such a weakling. But he could have given him such a better quirk, because you need to train to make the power stockpiler quirk worthwhile. And Yoichi, obviously, he can't really train because he's so underdeveloped and weak just as a person. Because even All for One says it in this chapter that because he didn't get enough nutrients as a baby, it probably led to the quirk factor being so minuscule. Because we also found out that when All for One and Yoichi were babies, after their mother, the Lady of the Night, the very first quirk user, gave birth to them, All for One kind of just sapped all of her quote-unquote nutrients. And, it just made him as big as All Might, because why not? And then it just made Yoichi a regular Japanese dude, I guess. But then later we come back to Kudo, the second user, and he's with the third user, whose name is Bruce. By the way, just subtly revealed right here. They're able to analyze the second user's blood or something. I don't know. They have equipment here, and they're able to see that Kudo now has 2 quirk factors, meaning that Kudo now has what is going to become One for All. And we don't see the exact moment that this happens, or maybe we do. I mean, maybe it's the moment when Kudo grabbed Yoichi's hand to save him, because I think they both had open wounds or something, maybe, or at some point they both had open wounds, and I guess that's how Yoichi was able to transfer One for All to him. I guess just subconsciously, unless they exchanged DNA in another way, which is always possible, but I don't think Horikoshi will ever explore that, if you know what I mean. Then we see this vision, or I don't know, we just see Yoichi talking. And he says, referring to All for One, the power to give and take could have been the kindest in the whole world. And that's very true, because we see, at one of those initial flashbacks of the beginning of Quirk Society, All for One would act like he was a benevolent figure to manipulate people, and he would take these heteromorphic quirks that were hindering people, and he would give it to people who didn't have quirks. So in theory, if he just kept doing that, he could have helped nearly the entire population. And I think this is more foreshadowing that Izuku will eventually have All for One's quirk. I think at the end he's going to pull an avatar, if you're familiar with the ending of that series. I won't spoil it for what happens, but in my opinion, Horikoshi has already taken so much from Avatar as it is. I don't see why he just wouldn't take the ending as well. But after this, we see a montage of All for One systematically killing all of the One for All users. We're also seeing the moment where I guess Dr. Yujiko falls in love with All for One. It looks like it's at some conference or something, or just, I don't know, some meeting that he had to show everybody that he's the king. I don't know. Maybe some cult thing. But we're also seeing that All for One was also unable to straight up take One for All from the users, because Yoichi, I guess his will or spirit lived on in the quirk factor, and it was just so strong that it even prevented All for One from being able to take it. So I guess this, just further angered All for One and made him want to take the quirk even more, rather than just trying to keep Yoichi for himself, kind of like a serial killer. I mean, literally like a serial killer. They take pieces of people that they like, or at least some of them, and they keep it as a memento. I mean, I guess that's originally how it started for All for One, and it eventually just became him wanting to become all powerful by getting ostensibly the strongest quirk besides his own. And with that, we eventually get to the fight between him and All Might, because him killing all of the One for All users eventually will lead him to fighting All Might. And man, it's pretty epic. This is all I've ever really wanted to see in the series, to be honest, since it was mentioned that this was a thing. And while we're only just getting one page dedicated to it with 2 panels, I'm grateful that we're at least getting this, because Horikoshi could have just glanced over this, or even just gave us one single panel in this montage of him killing them all. But let me just explain quickly why this battle is so significant. It goes back to what I was saying about they're both in their primes. These are the 2 strongest characters to ever exist within the series. I mean, it will probably be eclipsed in the last couple chapters when we see the final fight between Izuku and Shigaraki, because All Might didn't have access to the crazy plot power-up that Izuku has. The plot just didn't get to that point for All Might, so he had to grind and work and get all the power for himself. One for All wouldn't be what it is if it wasn't for All Might. He is the one who truly fostered it to become this outrageous power that it is. Not taking anything away from the previous users, I think it originally started with the 4th, when he figured out that he can just grind out the power stockpiler and become a superhero, essentially. But real quick, guys, Gamer Subs has a new flavor, and it's straight up called Lean. So now you can take your very own walk to Poland with Gamer Subs. And apparently it tastes like peach tea and lemonade, and it creates a new flavor. This is probably the best Gamer Subs flavor. And also it has a great little Joey B graphic on the front, guys. That's always fun. And since this is the walk, you can't just enjoy it with a single waifu cup. You gotta double stack them, because that's the thing that you do with Lean, right? So guys, if you're interested in getting literally the best Gamer Subs flavor, check the link in the description and make sure you use code BIGZ for 10% off. Keep walking out there, guys. But it was really All Might that took it to the level where he can just straight up pop All for One's head, which we'll talk about. All Might is also what One for All was eventually supposed to become anyway. A power strong enough to overthrow All for One, which he does. But him becoming strong enough and him being so passionate ultimately led them to having this big final battle 7 years before the first chapter. And it really could have been epic if we saw this play out, because All for One has a pretty cool power set, especially during this time. We see a glimpse of it in the All Might Rising OVA, which was a companion piece for the first movie, when he completely alters a city kind of, and then just blows it up with one of his energy manipulation quirks or whatever. And while we do get a glimpse of this through younger All for One, as he's been rewinding seeing in the last couple chapters, and also when he fought the last barrage of heroes with Endeavor, it still would have been different because he wouldn't have had like a time limit on him. And of course, we never really got to see All Might at this point, at the peak of his absolute power, going ham on someone. So it just would have been cool to be able to see this extended, you know. Maybe it just could have had an entire chapter dedicated to it. Why not? There is still hope that we'll get to see an extended sequence once this comes to the anime, but I'm not really going to hold my breath because they're already working these animators to death as it is anyway. So I'll be happy if it's just not like a still image montage and we get to see somewhat of this play out. But man, I just do love these two panels. All Might has so much raw emotion in his face because this is the culmination of his entire life essentially, and also he had to watch his master die and everyone else died that was involved with All For One. And also in this panel, you can see the damage that All Might took to the left side of his abdomen from All For One, the thing that nerfed him completely, and what also led him to having to pass One For All on to Izuku. We don't know exactly what he did, but Gran Torino says to All Might in their second fight with All For One, you know, the one that happens in season 2, that All For One said something, or I don't know, got through All Might to let his guard down, like he, you know, whatever. And then I guess he hit him with the drill quirk, or he hit him with the energy blast or something, and it took out that portion of All Might. And even then, All Might's like, no! And then in the final moments of this fight, he just hits him with like this perfect superhero punch and pops All For One's head. And this is what led to him becoming a potato. And I guess he was implied to be dead here because we eventually see him like in a freaking morgue afterwards. And this would have been the end of the series for sure. Like All Might would have done the deed and the world would have lived in a much, I wouldn't say peace. There will never be peace, unfortunately, but it will live in a balanced, better society than, of course, what it is now. Meaning that All Might is, for sure, the greatest hero to ever live, as we already knew. But, you know, the plot had different plans for him, unfortunately. And Yujiko is able to sneak into the morgue and take All For One's body. That's how easy it was, guys. And I know, everybody is none the wiser of Yujiko at this point. They just think he's a doctor, so he could just do whatever he wants. I get it. But why didn't they just like melt his body? Just melt that, or did vaporize it, or just smash his head some more. Make sure that his head is completely dead, or I don't know. Just don't leave the devil's body in a morgue unattended. There has to be like somebody out there with a quirk that can like melt a body or vaporize it, right? Just get Ashido's parents or something. It's just so frustrating that it was just so easy for Yujiko to get his body. But anyway, this is the end of the flashback, and we're coming to real time with All For One, who is still fighting against Bakugo, trying to get to Shigaraki so that he can forcibly take his quirk and, you know, take over his body and become the ultimate evil, or the true symbol of evil, as he always says. And it comes back to All For One saying, "It's all your fault, Kudo." And like I said, it's the whole trickle-down effect, the butterfly effect. It all started with Kudo looking at All For One that one day. It kind of gave him PTSD. And now he sees that very same look in Bakugo. And he's like, oh, I get it. They're not related because he killed everybody related to Kudo. That's how petty All For One is. Finally squashing that theory that they are related in some way. However, he says, oh, it's the eyes. They weren't like that before. It's just a coincidence. Like it transcended space and time just to oppose me. But he makes it look like he carries that man's will. So, if you're familiar with One Piece, this is kind of Horikoshi shoehorning in the Will of D in the very last chapters here, but I also talked about this, I had 2 or 3 chapters reviews ago, that Yoichi and Kudo were like the first iteration of Izuku and Bakugo, I guess. And the butterfly effect or trickle-down effect leads to another version of them coming along to eventually stop All For One. Just like, the Will of D and Joy Boy and Luffy in One Piece. Sorry, spoilers. Not really that big of spoilers, but it's like the same thing. Also goes back to Avatar, with the Avatar lineage. That's where I'm pretty sure Horikoshi even got the idea for One For All and the Vestiges and all that stuff. I also like the fact that Izuku does use Gear Shift on Bakugo, which was Kudo's quirk. So that's another way for him to live through Bakugo. Pretty cool stuff here. I mean, I do like it. And it gets to the point of where All For One is just freaking out. He's like, I'm running out of time. I need to get to Shigaraki right now, and I need to take over him. Because, he's constantly rewinding, and he's already like a middle schooler or something at this point, maybe. And if he keeps fighting against Bakugo, he'll keep rewinding. And for some reason, All For One just like can't kill Bakugo. I'm not saying that I want him to, but with all of the crazy power and quirks that he has, you'd think that he can just kill Bakugo. I get Bakugo is at the peak of his power right now, and he's like a Super Saiyan, but still. So instead of thinking rationally, All For One decides to accomplish all of his tasks in one feat by just immediately jetlining it to Shigaraki and then forcibly taking him over. So what he does is full factor release, where he, I guess, is using all of his quirks at once and becoming this big flesh amalgamation similar to Tetsuo from the end of the Akira movie. And this is going to allow him to repel himself by expelling all of the energy from this. And it looks amazing. Like, Horikoshi really went in on this. And I guess this is going to be the ending sequence for All For One. Like, in the next chapter, I think this is the end. Not of the series, but of this fight. Because All Might's like, he'll rewind back to a baby if he uses that. It's his final gamble. And I do think that's going to happen. Because as he's coming down the city trying to get towards Shigaraki, Bakugo is in his way. And he's like, are you stupid? You're bound to lose with that thing. And that's very true. All For One, as quote-unquote smart as he is, and all of this planning and contingencies he's put into play, it ultimately comes down to him just making a big emotional gamble. Which I guess is fitting, because again, the trickle-down effect from Kudo and Yoichi, but more so just Kudo, living on through Bakugo and making All For One think emotionally rather than rationally. So I think Bakugo is going to stop All For One by using whatever his final ultimate attack is. He's not going to kill him because, he's Bakugo, but he will stop All For One. And I think All For One will eventually rewind back to the baby that we saw at the beginning of the flashback. And he'll essentially be done at that point. And I think Shigaraki will be the one to finish the job there. He might straight up eat All For One as a baby or something, or at the minimum absorb him, or just decay him after he takes the quirk factor maybe. Or he just says screw it and just keeps his own original quirk factor maybe, but pretty sure Shigaraki is going to be the one to finish off All For One here, but Bakugo is going to be the one that defeats him, and that's the most important thing. But that's pretty much it for this one, guys. Let me know what you think about this chapter in the comments, and if you liked it, please give it a like, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.